Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Accelerating Textile Circularity with Digital IDs, sponsored by Avery Dennison. I'm Jen Hanks. I serve as the Director of Brand Protection at the American Apparel and Footwear Association. I'm excited to moderate our discussion today. First, I just want to give a quick overview of AAFA. We're the National Trade Association representing apparel, footwear, and other sewn product companies and their suppliers, which compete in the global market. We represent more than 1,000 world-famous name brands. We serve as the trusted public policy and political voice of the apparel and footwear industry, its management and shareholders, and more than 3.2 million U.S. workers, and the contribution of more than 490 billion in annual U.S. retail sales. We drive progress on three key priorities: brand protection, supply chain and sourcing, and trade logistics and manufacturing. Just a few logistical items before we go ahead and get started. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, throughout, please contact Zoom support. You'll see some information right there on the screen. Today's webinar is being recorded and it'll be available for download in AAFA's Learning Center, along with a presentation deck in about 48 hours. Today will be more of a conversation throughout. Please type any questions in the box that you see at the bottom of your screen, or feel free to send directly to any of us. We'll save and hold those until the end. And anything that we don't cover, we'll try and follow up by email. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. I am pleased to introduce our speakers today: Mike Colarossi, Vice President of Innovation, Product Line Management, and Sustainability at Avery Dennison. Under Michael's leadership, Avery Dennison has adopted a strategic view, prioritizing solutions that shape the industry's future while meeting rigorous compliance standards. Michael was instrumental in developing Avery Dennison's 2025 and 2030 sustainability goals and the Apparel Solutions Global Experience Centers. And joining us also is the co-founder and CEO of Circ, Pete Majeranowski. Circ is the company revolutionizing the fashion industry's environmental impact with recycling technology for mixed fabric textiles. In addition to being named to 2022 Vogue's Business 100 Innovators list, Pete has spoken or presented at Textile Exchange, Circularity 19, Fashion Impact Fund, the UN Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network, Taiwan Textile Research Institute, and many others. During today's webinar, you'll learn about the EU Digital Product Passport legislation, how Circ has developed pioneering technology that transforms polycotton into reusable fibers, insights into how item-level product data via digital IDs can help recyclers like Circ carry out complex textile processing. As I mentioned, it'll be more of a Q&A, so please feel free to ask anything along the way. We'll also have a poll for you guys, so stay tuned for that. And with that, Mike and Peter, let's go ahead and get started with the first set of questions. Mike, why did Avery Dennison decide to partner with Circ? And can you both...
First of all, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
And before answering that question, I think Pete has a little bit of work to do to update his bio, because there's a big congratulations to him and to Circ. For those of you who haven't been following his social media or social media in general, Circ was very recently recognized as a finalist in the Earthshot Prize. The Earthshot Prize, for those of you who aren't familiar, is Prince William's foundation that recognizes pioneers in innovation who are addressing some of the world's biggest climate challenges. So huge congratulations to Pete and the entire Circ team, but a reminder that he does need to update that bio.
That's a good one. Yes, congratulations.
Thank you, and thank you, Mike, and thanks, Jen, for having us. And I'll try to work in His Royal Highness at least once in this presentation. That's my goal every day now, but thank you.
Very good. So to the question, why did Avery Dennison choose to partner with Circ? Avery Dennison, one, is committed to addressing some of the world's most difficult challenges. We have for a long time. It's part of our legacy, part of our history. And of course, climate change, and circularity and circular economy are some of the challenges that the apparel and textile industry currently is facing. We believe that our technologies, in particular, those that intersect with the physical and digital, can help enable things like textile to textile recycling, better visibility of the supply chain, waste reduction and waste elimination, improved transparency, on and on it goes. But we recognize at the same time that we can't do it ourselves. And so we look throughout the ecosystem to find partners who are innovating in spaces that are interesting to us and are solving some of the biggest challenges. And Circ is obviously one of those organizations that's doing that, particularly when it comes to textile recycling. So looking to demonstrate not only what our technologies can do to enable recycling, but also looking to find ways of helping to accelerate Circ's technology and scaling it beyond a pilot stage to make certain that we can address the challenge of textile to textile recycling throughout the world. So that's primarily the reason for us in choosing to partner.
Great. Anything to add in terms of the closed loop system and what fashion could change in terms of textile recycling and the benefits and environmental effects that it could bring? Now, you touched on some of that in your response. Anything else to add there?
I think it's the ultimate solution. I mean, Pete can probably speak about this a little bit more effectively than I can, but today the issue is not of textile recycling or getting materials into the recycling process. It's actually end garment, end consumer to turning that into recycled fibers. And so if that is the ultimate aim, I think, that the industry is after. And by applying a digital ID to every garment, we believe that you can enable that process, ensuring that consumers understand that this garment is recyclable, communicating the how to recycle this, where can they drop it off, how can they return it, and then once that digital ID is on the garment, also then working with the recycling network to make that process more efficient by communicating information digitally to automate sortation, provide content information to make the recycling process more efficient. I don't know, Pete, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I think we all know why we're trying to change this industry from a linear one to a circular one, but you cannot do it without digital. You need the physical solutions that Circ provides in terms of how you actually recycle things so they can go back to the beginning of the supply chain. But that whole ecosystem is going to be held together by digital solutions. And so that's why this partnership is so interesting from our perspective. And the benefit here is that we're going to divert more things from landfill faster by using digital solutions. And Mike touches on it, right? It's one, just communicating with the consumers. We all want to keep a pair of pants as long as possible. And so if you can enable the consumer to have the tools at their fingertips on what to do if something is damaged, or where to get it repaired, or how to repair it themselves, that's a very different experience from somebody reading that digital ID that's an industrial sorter for recycling solutions. But that's important too, because if it goes down to the end of use pathway, where should it go from there? Maybe it's a pure cotton garment that should go to a cotton recycler, or maybe it's a mixed that should come to Circ, et cetera. And so digital is going to play a pivotal role. It's going to accelerate circularity, and it's frankly going to enable it.
I like to use a really simple example, actually. The state I live in, Massachusetts, recently banned putting textiles into waste. Our municipal waste systems. So when that regulation came out, my son turned to me and said, "Well, now what do I do with my garment? How do I know where to recycle? And that's the gap that's in the system today. We have regulation that's now coming into force that's banning textile into certain waste streams, but we've not yet actually taken the step to tell a consumer what do they do next. So, I can donate it, but frankly, I think we all recognize that most donation tends to end up in landfills anyway. So giving consumers that knowledge and the power through digital communication will hopefully enable that recycling process.
That's a really good point. Peter, you had mentioned in terms of how revolutionary it is turning polycotton into reusable fibers. Can you explain the technical process and how scalable and efficient the technology is?
Sure. So Circ is a waste to value business model. So we really want things that are end of use, can't be repaired, can't be resold to come into our system. And the majority of fabrics today are polycotton blends. And when you take a synthetic plastic and purposely engineer it with a natural fiber like cotton, it's very difficult to separate and recycle them. But that's where we come in. It's a hydrothermal process, meaning we use water with heat under pressure to break down and separate the polyester from the cotton and to then purify both those streams. So the same natural resources that we currently use to make clothing can be made with those same resources, except instead of coming from nature, they're coming from the end of use waste clothing. To your question about the efficiency and scalability, we recover over 90% on both the cotton and the polyester side. We're using our patented solution in commercially available off-the-shelf equipment that's already scaled at working at large scale in other industries. So when you combine the abundance of waste material that we've been talking about with this scalable solution using off-the-shelf equipment, we're ready to go. And so we're really, really excited about that. And I should add that yes, we are using water, but we recycle over 90% of it back into the beginning. So this is a very low impact process to make our linear system circular.
Interesting. Can you explain how digital ID helps recyclers like Circ with detailed product data for textile processing? And then how does this information improve recycling efficiency and accuracy?
Yeah, sure. I think Pete and I will tag team this one a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's a question that came into the Q&A I saw on how does a digital ID work? So let's start there. So we can assign a digital ID either through a QR code, through RFID technology, through NFC technology, or any other digital technology that exists today to an individual garment. That tends to occur when the garment is manufactured, and that can be applied via a label that's sewn in. It can be applied on a label that hangs off of a garment, or it can be applied on a label that is applied to a garment, so it's permanent. Our view is that it needs to be permanent to drive the full end-to-end value across that supply chain. If someone's cutting it off, at the point of purchase, you lose the value of that digital ID. So we're very much advocating for it to be either directly applied to a garment or sewn in onto that care and content label. Once you have that digital ID, then you can start assigning information to it. And today, Avery Dennison manages a lot of the care and content information for brands around the world. And so we can actually assign that care and content information directly to that digital ID. So with the scan of a QR code, either a consumer can get that experience, or a recycler who would scan it would get that information as well. At that point, that information, particularly the content information, is key for the first step of recycling, which is automating sortation. So understanding, what you are recycling and what waste stream it should flow into is key for a number of recyclers. Maybe a little bit less important for Circ, given their unique technology, but for other recyclers in the ecosystem, a very important step. And then with that information, you then understand what's going into your recycling system. So if you're doing a chemical recycling process, there's a little bit of chemistry involved, and you can then optimize your process by knowing your inputs to maximize what you get at the back end. So that's how the system would work. The interesting part about this, and what we don't often talk about, is that this is just one use case. Once you get that digital ID onto the garment, you can then generate a wide variety of other use cases. You can actually generate and provide information to consumers on where can I drop this off? You can have direct marketing efforts. You can tell your sustainability story. You can address transparency of the supply chain and provide information on where that was made, what went into it, all through that unique single digital ID. So we see it as an incredibly powerful tool of unlocking the circular supply chain, but then also creating a number of other very unique use cases as well. But Pete, maybe you can touch around how Circ is using technology, to the digital ID technology.
Yeah, you hit a lot of great points there, and that I was going to say, but I'll say this, that you look at the emerging technologies. We're still in the early days of circularity, at least for what's called enhanced recycling or chemical recycling, and everybody is starting with post-industrial waste, which is good. For us, anything that's not being burned or going to a landfill is a win. And that's a great first place to start. But there's a massive amount of post-consumer waste from households. And when you just think about your own closet and you look at even an outdoor jacket, and there's different layers of different types of materials, and how is that held together? Some of it's from adhesives. What kind of dyes were used? What kind of finishing chemistry? All that information can be on that digital ID and can help in the sorting, but as Mike mentioned, also help in the process and optimization there. And I have a very funny story. When we were in our early days, still developing, optimizing our process, we were wondering why one garment that looked almost identical performed a little bit differently than another. And so I went to a major, I'll say, denim brand and asked, hey, can you please tell me, my scientists want to know exactly what types of dyes were used, what types of finishing chemistry, what kind of, and they said, we can guess, but we don't really know. Our tier 1 mills know, but that, it's a multi-stage supply chain, and it's been highly optimized, and there's structures there where people don't pass that information down, and that makes it very hard for processes like ours, especially when they're developing them, to know what variables you're dealing with. And so that's where digital ID comes in. And then there's the whole transparency. I just talked about the opaqueness. We're working really hard at Circ to scale this solution, and we still have a road ahead of us. And it'd be a shame if we work this hard and we feel like we have some agency here as the key linkage from end of use to new use, and our products went down a supply chain that wasn't above board. And so that's another part of this partnership that really excites us, and frankly excites the brands that we work with.
Questions? Mike, can you touch on the upcoming EU digital product passport legislation? And how will this new law encourage the use of digital ID technology? Any positive aspects that you expect out of this?
Yeah, the EU digital passport legislation actually links up very much to what Pete was talking about, transparency or the current opaqueness of the supply chain. It really is designed to address that issue of supply chain transparency. So the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles is what's driving this. The expectation, while it's still sort of in discussion within the EU, is that the EU will require for all garments sold in Europe, regardless of where they are produced and regardless of the home country of the brand or retailer, that they are going to have a digital passport assigned to them. We're actively engaged with the EU in working through what that possibly will look like. But we can expect that one, there will be a digital passport that will have some level of permanence for any garment that is sold in Europe in the not too distant future. We can also expect that the regulation is going to go beyond the current requirements for care and content to go further into the supply chain to provide additional transparency information. There is still debate around how far the EU intends to go, but the current thinking is to at least the tier 3 level in manufacturing. So that is what we anticipate. There are a number of consortiums that are currently active and trying to understand, trying to educate regulators on the path forward. Avery Dennison is actively engaged in those. We're expecting our next update sometime within the next 6 weeks or so, which should give us a little bit more clarity on what specifically the requirements will be. And that will be the permanent record then for the EU. The EU is going to be using it for consumer, but they're also going to be using it for enforcement for things like duties and customs officials. So it will become the record, probably the most important record for the garment that gets imported. So our message to brands and the supply chain is to get ready. A lot of the focus right now, very honestly, is on the brand and how the brands are going to be communicating this information. Most likely going to have to be something that is consumer facing. So probably a QR code or probably NFC technology. That's likely going to be the technologies used. But there's not enough discussion yet around the supply chain. And we are going to have to work diligently to make certain that if we have to get to that tier 3 or beyond, that we're able to access the information within the supply chain, whether that's what your source of cotton is, what dyes you're using, what sort of labor was used. There are going to have to be systems in place to be able to capture that information. And right now, not enough conversation around how we're going to go do that as an industry, very honestly.
Interesting. But I think that the point of your comment in terms of, for US brands to get ready and to start to look and to figure out the application, especially around the specifications that you mentioned in the tiers and what will need to be disclosed.
And if you're a US brand selling in Europe, it will be a legal requirement.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciated too the aspect of the brand protection. I know that you and I had also talked about that in March at the summit, and the authenticity that will also have on identifying counterfeits and legitimate items.
It's one of the things that the EU is looking to use this technology to address. Jen, as you know, brand protection solutions are probably a little bit more complex than that, but this digital layer to brand protection is only going to enhance the physical components of brand protection right now. And I think it will also allow the consumer to start authenticating and verifying that what I bought is original.
Yeah, I like the point that you guys have both made in terms of empowering the consumer with the technology. And I think that this is also why AAFA led a global coalition letter on digital labeling in July. It had 130 signatures. So there's definitely the collective will for reform here. Pete, anything else to add there? If not, we'll go ahead and go to the poll. Or Mike, anything else?
Just that comment there, Europe is leading like they often do in clean tech and just green policy. But if you are a brand selling in a major market like Europe, you're likely going to apply that to your whole. It's kind of like Apple having to switch to the USB-C because of Europe legislation. And that's going to be a similar analog for us in this industry.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and go to the poll. This question's for the audience. You'll see what percentage of the global economy do you believe is circular? The options are less than 10%, 10% to 25%, 25% to 50%, or more than 50%. So we'll go ahead and pause here. Give everybody time to go ahead and input their answer. Again, the question is, what percentage of the global economy do you believe is circular? Less than 10%, 10% to 25%, 25 to 50%, or more than 50%? Think we can go ahead and see the results. Looks like the majority of participants selected 83% at less than 10%.
We have a well-informed audience then. So well done, everyone. That is correct. The global economy currently, per a report that Deloitte was one of the sponsors of, the global economy now is approximately 7.2% circular. What's actually more disconcerting than that number is the statistics below, is that it's actually declined from where it was in 2018. So Pete mentioned earlier, we have a lot of work to do, as a group, as an industry, and then across the global economy to really address this problem. And I think most climate scientists, most sustainability experts are indicating that getting circularity right is essential to addressing the challenges that we have as it relates to our climate, and the amount of waste that is going into landfills. So bit of a sobering statistics, if you will, but only sort of reinforces the need for continued investment in technology like Circs to address this issue.
Mike, any other trends that you're seeing moving in this direction, considering the state of recycling facilities worldwide? What investments and infrastructure are needed to fully realize the circular fashion industry?
So I think we're seeing a trend overall to more awareness of the issue, at a consumer level, at a brand level, at a supply chain level. So I do think the apparel and textile and footwear industry needs to be lauded for the good work thus far, in identifying the issue and starting down a path. I do see a growing a number of investments in the recycling space, in interesting and new technologies, but frankly, it's not enough. We're going to have to increase both private and public funding to address the issue. And when you think about circularity and the role that Avery Dennison can play in enabling, the role that Circ can play in driving raw materials, there's then the supply chain component, there's the logistics component. All of those different players have to be investing in their systems and processes to ultimately address this issue. Yeah, I'm seeing some positive momentum. I think there's a huge opportunity for greater collaboration across that supply chain. And that's why we're partnering with Circ. We're looking to partner with brands, of course, but also logistics partners to bring everyone together to really address this issue. Because we all benefit if we're able to, when we're able to solve it. I'm not going to say if, when we're able to solve it. I don't know, Pete, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, you said it beautifully. But I am encouraged and I am optimistic because I can speak from the Circ perspective. We've felt an increasing pull for this solution over the last 18 months. And I think that's certainly being driven by regulation, whether it's in the US, like Mike referred in Massachusetts, or some of the things that are happening in California and New York in legislation, definitely Europe, but also consumer awareness. And brands seem to be now really eager to see these solutions scale. So it's not an if, it's a when.
Definitely. And when you're talking about consumer awareness and, that technology needs to be on the garment, it's not cutting off the tag at the first opportunity when you take that item home. I know that a lot of kids are like that with tags, and so definitely some forward thinking in terms of technologies going forward. Mike, can you share some real world examples of how this technology has been used in the industry so far? I know you shared one use case, but do you have anything else to share?
Yeah, so I think the most visible use cases around RFID. RFID has been adopted en masse by the apparel and footwear industry, and that's starting that digitization journey, if you will, driven largely by supply chain transparency and the efficiency that you gain. But we all know as well, in driving that, you're reducing waste. And we're working to try to articulate what that is. I think that's the most obvious that's out there. Over the past 18 months or so, we've partnered with a number of brands to get the starting point of a digital product passport onto garments. I think our most interesting, a couple of interesting ones, we partnered with UpWest, which is Express's online brand, to put a digital ID on the garment that enabled upcycling of that garment. And we demonstrated, one, that consumers would engage. Two, we demonstrated the savings and the efficiency gains in the recycling process by being able to communicate carrying content information to the recycler digitally. So we're able to demonstrate that. There is a swimwear company. I'm going to mispronounce it. I think it's called Swine, SWIJIN. And they now have digital care labels on all of their goods, primarily to provide information digitally, but also an opportunity to start communicating information. And then I would say we have a number of other active collaborations in place with brands in both the US and in Europe around getting that digital ID on board the garment now in preparation for digital product passport, but also to advance brand protection, also to drive consumer engagement. So each brand is at a slightly different point in the journey. And then the final thing I'll just say is that we're working with the supply chain now. I said the supply chain is a gap. So we're looking at how our digital solutions can actually provide that transparency that the brands can then utilize to address digital product passports.
What about on the consumer, and how can consumers help recycling and ensure the system's success? We talked about empowering consumers, but what more could consumers do?
Great question. I think first ask. We need to. There's an education effort required for consumers. I doubt that most consumers know how to recycle or upcycle a garment today. And I think the industry, brands and retailers have an opportunity to really encourage that. I think a lot of the take-back programs that are starting to pop up are fantastic ways of not only educating, but also driving traffic back into your stores. So I think that there's an opportunity there. And then there's of course, brands and designers in particular have an opportunity to understand, the products that are coming from a Circ, and how can they incorporate that into their garments in the future, but also how can they design for circularity, to make sure that the systems are just more effective and more efficient. So I think those are the big things. The reality is, the reuse recycle market is just going to continue to grow. It's outpacing the growth of the traditional apparel and footwear market. We all know that. And I think it's expected to reach something like $350 billion in value by I think by 2027. So it's on a path of incredible growth. So finding ways to engage in that part of the economy as well is going to be incredibly important. But Pete, I'm sure you have other thoughts on what brands and consumers can be doing.
Yeah, well, on the consumer side, I think there's still education, as you say, awareness is a big one. We even commissioned a professional survey of people that work in fashion and fashion executives, and the marks were not very good compared to this poll in terms of insiders actually knowing what the clothing is made from. And spoiler alert, it's oil is the majority. And who's making it and where it's made and how it's made. But we know that especially the younger segments are demanding or expecting sustainability, looking for recyclable content. So I encourage consumers to continue that journey in terms of education and paying attention to what's on those labels and what they're buying. And then from a brand perspective, the supply chain is hyper competitive. It has been. This is what the oldest industry in the world, one of the most optimized ones. And so it's really hard on them to put all the innovation on them. And I think what brands can do more of is invest more in these technologies. But there's a fairly low risk way that they can invest, and that would be when solutions are scaling, commit to purchase. That's a term of art called an offtake agreement. But what that basically means is, in Circ's example, if we raise all the capital to build this mega factory, find the right people, hire them, train them, turn it on, it works, it's making product within the pre-agreed specs that you're already buying, that you will buy it. And you sign to that and commit to that. And I know that's a tough thing for brands to do because they typically are not buying at the fiber level where we are. It's several tiers down. And they typically are not buying long-term or committing. But for some of these bigger brands and retailers, it would still be just a small percentage, if even a percent of their buying. And by showing that leadership, frankly, it creates a bankable document. There's a lot of people that want to finance this, but they need to see that long-term commitment from the brands. And if we can connect those dots, I think it's relatively low risk to really scale this. And so I'd say this is investing, but really those offtake agreements is where brands can contribute most.
Jen, can I make maybe another provocative statement?
Sure,
we have
yeah.
to figure out how to address the full economic pyramid as well. So a lot of what we talk about here, we talk about and we're addressing maybe the top 5% of that pyramid. Our real challenge is how do we start addressing that the lower part of the pyramid, the lower cost t-shirts that people either wear for fashion or they wear because that's all they can afford. We don't often talk about that as an industry, and yet the volumes there are tremendous. And so I think we need to also have the courage around talking about, yes, the top of the pyramid and all the top brands that are addressing it, but there's a whole other part of the apparel industry that is local, that we also have to think about addressing, so that in other parts of the world where people are operating at the level of poverty or slightly above that poverty line, they also can be part of the system. And until we address that, I do sometimes worry that the focus is only at the top, which may be a bit provocative, but I'm not going to apologize if it is.
I know, and cost driving is one of the key decision makings in terms of counterfeits too. Not when that's not on the consumer deception side. So definitely a good point in terms of that price point and bringing that into the discussion. We've had a lot of discussion about why both on the sides of brands, consumers, regulation. What about the how? What advice do you have in terms of aiming to promote a circular fashion industry? Where should brands even start?
So my recommendation is always start small. Don't try to boil the ocean. And starting small will mean different things for different brands or different parts of the supply chain. It can be starting with a single product line. It could be starting with a single item, and starting to understand how you can make that individual part of your supply chain circular. But don't try to do it for everything out of the gate. I think, and I think we just put up our sort of our 3-step process. So thank you for that. What we also say is start by getting that digital ID on board. So whether it's digital product passport legislation that's going to require you to do that, whether it's this idea of being able to enable circularity, whether it's an idea of being able to talk to your consumer, after the point of purchase, whether or if it's brand protection or right there's multiple use cases. Get that digital ID on board that garment as soon as possible. Then we can assign that unique ID to it, and we can start assigning data to it. And then we can create whatever the applications we need to actually go out and address whatever the use cases are. In this case, we would be able to work with partners like Circ, with partners in the industry that are driving the logistics side of this, to create the full solution to create a circular economy. But it all starts with getting that digital ID on board that garment. So I would say that's where I would start, and I would start either, as I said earlier, with one product, with a product line, to start your learnings, and then continue to scale from there. And also start with one use case. Don't start with saying I want to do circularity and brand protection and consumer engagement, because the scale of the problem that you try to solve just becomes far too large for most large organizations to manage effectively. So start small, pilot it, prove out success, and go on to the next thing.
That's great, Peter. Anything to add there? If not, we're going to go ahead and dive into questions. I know that we have quite a few.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that. I think that a lot of brands have very thankfully made some great sustainability goals, and I'm on my high horse, but you should follow that up, I think, with an offtake to really show that you're committed to that. That's really important, and definitely start with the digital ID, because that's a wonderful starting point, and it's going to really future proof what we're doing today as these solutions continue to scale.
And engage, right? Engage with Pete, engage with me, engage with the ecosystem, to learn. There's plenty of opportunities to collaborate within the system. And as I said earlier, the only way we're going to solve this is frankly by finding out how to collaborate effectively to address the challenges that we face as an industry, but also as we face as a planet.
Yeah, and one final thought on that too is that it's maybe more geared for the media out there, but we should give some grace to brands and retailers as they try things. I know it's a fine line between greenwashing but there are brands out there that are really trying hard, and they're scared of any backlash, and that's not productive. That's not going to enable people to feel they can take risks to really help bring circularity around. And so I think we should be a little bit gracious as we look at initiatives that are happening right now.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to take some of the questions from the chat first. First question, I think we don't get to, if folks want to go ahead and ask, go ahead and type it in. If we don't get to it and your name is disclosed, then we'll follow up afterwards. So first question, who owns the data?
I guess the question is what data? The way that it currently operates is some brands choose to own their care and content information, their compliance information. Some brands choose to turn it over to their supply chain. So that answer varies. And then I think there's a lot of open conversation and discussion around ultimately data rights versus data ownership. So I think it's an evolving space. It'll be something that the DPP is going to have to address. But right now it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Currently, the length of labels incentivizes consumers to cut off the labels after point of sale. We've already touched on that. A digital ID, if it absorbs current labeling requirements, could limit label sizes and incentivize those labels to stay on garments longer. So I guess more of a comment. Any thoughts there?
No, that's correct. I think if you replace with a QR code, then yeah, the label will get smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And it may incentivize. The other option that is out there as well is heat seal technologies. We can put it into a woven label. There are other ways of doing it so that it's actually permanent on a garment. And then ultimately, Avery Dennison is innovating technologies that will allow it to be incorporated directly into the garment even more seamlessly. So one of our brand partners is actually piloting that technology right now, where the technology itself is actually sewn into the overlock stitch on a seam of the garment. So there's multiple technologies out there, but yes, the smaller we can get it, the more likely it's going to stay on.
And digital IDs replace traditional interior labels from an import-export standpoint.
The EU is intending that's one of the use cases for digital product passport in the EU. In the US, currently, no. And Asia, no.
Let me, Pete, one for you. Textile to textile recycling is obviously an important part of getting to a circular economy. But how do you ensure you're not just feeding the elephant in the room, overproduction, overconsumption with recycled materials?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's as a newcomer, I would say, to this industry, there's a strong psychological component to fashion that we all recognize and realize. It's a very personal thing. It's, the front cover of our book. I've stole this statement. I don't know where I heard it, but it's like the only artistic thing most people do every day. And so it's tough. Even thrifting really is firing those same brain chemicals, right? It's new to you. You feel like you receive some value. And so that's a big one. And we really applaud any efforts to think more about being more mindful of our purchasing decisions, keeping things longer. But that's going to be a long road to play. What we think is wonderful about circular technologies like ours is it enables completely new models that you've seen in other industries like construction or buildings, where a major company like Siemens leases you the lights, and they maintain them and they replace them and they monitor the energy usage and all that stuff, and it's a service. And so you could see, and there's already been some attempts out there, which I really think are wonderful, of you can't buy this garment, but you can lease it. And so we like to talk about wearing the same clothing for life, or wearing the same molecules for life. And we think that's another interesting opportunity for brands and retailers to create a stickiness factor with their customers, because now you can create this wonderful digital ledger showing how much they've brought things back and returned them, and how much water that saved, how much CO2 that saved, people it's employed. A lot of interesting things to do there that will be ultimately better for the planet. And then the last point I'll make to that is that everything we do We always look at a lot of different metrics, things like life cycle assessments, to ensure that what we're doing is better than the status quo and significantly better, and it is.
And I'll just add, in support of Pete and Circ, I think we can't let perfection be the enemy of good. The reality is that Circ is addressing a really pressing need for the apparel and textile industry. And while yes, we have to ultimately address overproduction, producing more but doing it with recycled raw materials is a heck of a lot better than producing more and using virgin materials. So I think it's not going to be just one answer to solve everything. It's going to be multiples, and I think we have to make certain that we are progressing and on our path and improving while we look for, well, of course we're looking for perfection, but we need to make progress.
Thanks for that. Another question on the EU Digital Product Passport regulation. When does that go into effect?
Still a little bit up in the air, unfortunately. What we're expecting is the final rule to be somewhere in the course of the next 12 to 18 months, and to go into effect in 2026, which then you have to back your supply chain up from there. So most likely, most garment manufacturers selling in Europe are going to have to be putting digital IDs on their garments, end of next year, early 2025 would be the current estimate.
I have another
I would
question.
encourage you to go much faster, frankly.
Like you said, start now.
Start now.
There was another question in terms of, you had talked about starting with one style, and starting with one product line. What would it cost to have one digital trigger on one style?
You're asking the innovation and sustainability guy that question, and not the commercial guy. So I would hate to wager a guess. We're not talking about some earth-shattering investment to do it. What it does require, though, it requires you to think differently about the model. And as you move into a digital model versus a physical model, the commercial models are different. You move away from a physical discussion into things like software as a service, subscriptions, those sorts of things. So I think it's less about maybe the overall cost and more about getting comfortable with a model that looks very different. Don't tell my commercial team I said that.
I'll just add to that, though, about that sort of getting comfortable. It's also, the roles are starting to blur. I wouldn't think of it as a cost of the garment and how does that affect my P&L from a supply chain sourcing metric or KPI or whatever it is, because it's now also part of the communication and the customer experience and the marketing. And so I think how that gets allocated and how that's thought about is going to cause some change in just the basic structures that you currently see in brands and retailers.
That's a really good point, Pete. It's about value and the value that it's creating. Yeah. So in the digital space, that's really what it's going to be about in the future. What's the value of unlocking circularity? What's the value of unlocking brand protection? What's the value of unlocking communicating with your consumer? That's where it's going to shift.
And then is somebody checking if the data is correct? For example, the breakdown in terms of the fiber and the recycling process.
It is correct.
Who's checking if the data is correct?
Oh, coming into Circ.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we look a lot at other traditional recycling industries, and you talk to any expert. I think I see Raymond's here in the chat or in the Q&A. You're always going to have some contamination, and so what we try best to do is source it, knowing that it's either polyester, cotton, or polycotton blend. We can also take cellulosics, like a lyocell blend, into our process. But then at our gate, we still want use some sensors to do a final sort to make sure that we have as pure a stream as possible going in.
And then let me go ahead. I think we have time for maybe just a few more. Is there anything specifically that you guys want to touch on? If not, I'll just kind of start going through a few more. How costly would permanent labels with digital IDs be?
I think I would respond the same way. It's more about the value that it's creating than the cost of the label, and we need to start changing how we think of it.
And then what is the smallest you could print a heat seal of a QR code? I know that we had talked about the smallest, the easiest to leave it on.
It's actually not a print issue. It's actually a phone readability issue. So we can go pretty small, but these are all optically read. So really depends on the camera. So when we get those questions, we always just suggest sort of send us your artwork, and then what format you want, and then we'll give you the best advice that we can.
And then will they last the life of the garment, quote unquote?
It depends on the technology you choose. So the and then I saw what is defined as life of garment. Right now, the EU is working on that definition. I know a number of different brands and retailers have their own definitions. They're not consistent. A printed technology like a heat seal label or something that's printed on the PFL, it's going to last. Most likely, will last the life of the garment, but depending on what the rules state. We also have technology that we're innovating when it comes to sensors, RFID, NFC, that are getting up to wash levels that are very impressive. That right now would sort of meet most brands' definition of life of garment.
All right, I think we'll follow up with the rest of them via email. Let me go ahead and just any last closing remarks before we kind of close out. Thank you each for your time today. Anything that you want to touch on before we kind of close?
I mean, I'll start just by thanking AFA again, thanking Pete, of course, for joining us here. We're excited to partner with Circ. We're excited to partner with the industry in solving these challenges. As I said earlier, this is going to require all of us coming together to address the challenges that we face. So looking forward to it. I know the journey ahead is long and sometimes it looks torturous, but I'm confident in that we have the technology. It's available today to go out and start addressing some of these challenges. So my ask is let's get moving. Let's get to it. Pete?
Yeah, that was great, Mike. And I echo thanking AFA for having me here and Avery Dennison. I love talking about circularity. What I'd add to that is, the solutions are here now, which is the good news. The tough news is that it's a really big industry, and it's going to take some time, but we shouldn't be discouraged. I like to look at the paper recycling industry, for example. Right now, roughly, it's about the same size as the textile industry. And right now, it's about 55% recycled. The majority of that infrastructure, including sorting, aggregation, collection, happened from 1990 to 2010, where in that 20 years, they created 130 million tons of annual capacity. And so you're roughly, that's about what we're doing. And we're adding more as an industry as more people consume, but also as more people come out of poverty and as the planet adds population. So this is doable. We just need to work together, echoing again Mike's comments here that circularity is a team sport. And I think if we just take a very sober, non-judgmental view of where we are today, and just go open-eyed, we can fix this, and we can fix this relatively fast.
Thank you both so much for joining us. I just want to close with a couple upcoming events where we can continue the discussion. In November, registration is open for the Cambodia Social Responsibility Workshop, the India Social Responsibility Workshop, and the 2023 Apparel and Footwear Compliance Conference in Vietnam. So Asia focus right there, you'll see on your screen. Looking ahead to 2024, early bird registration has opened for two events, our 2024 Product Safety and Compliance Seminar. That's in Long Beach, California in February. And then also joining us in Washington, D.C. for the annual executive summit, March 6th to 8th. Again, Michael, Peter, thank you so much for the informative webinar and discussion today. And thank you to Avery Dennison for sponsoring today's program. A reminder that a link to the recording will be sent via email and also posted on aafaglobal.org. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.